Nexus PMG welcomes you to the Bigger Than Us podcast, which we as energy geeks lovingly refer to as the BTU. Bigger Than Us is a podcast that focuses on ideas that will shape the future of our planet and ultimately our existence. We will occasionally lean into energy topics because, after all, it's the key to our collective survival. But we'll also explore other ideas and topics that we believe will have an impact that is bigger than us. And now, on to today's show. Hello, and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Adam Zurofsky to the show. Adam Zurofsky currently serves as founding executive director of Rewiring America, a nonprofit dedicated to combating climate change and spurring economic growth through the rapid and widespread electrification of the U.S. economy. As executive director, Adam sets RA's strategic priorities, manages its policy development, partnership, and communication activities, and manages all day-to-day operations. Until mid-2019, Adam served as Director of State Policy and Agency Management for the state of New York, where he led the development and implementation of all major policy initiatives for Governor Cuomo, and was responsible for strategic management of the state's executive agencies and authorities and their more than 150,000 employees. Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Raj. Thanks for having me.
Adam, thank you for joining. Adam, where are you currently located?
I'm in New York City.
How's the weather up there?
It's a little cloudy today, although it's been pretty good recently.
I'm going to let you in today. Dallas is at about 42 degrees, rainy.
Better here. We're about 50. When I took the dog for the walk this morning, it was about 55 and a little bit cloudy, but nonetheless tolerable. So, hey,
It's not very often it gets to be better up there, is it?
No, it's, other than when it's too hot down there. I remember I spent a week in Houston actually at one point in the summer, and it's just it brings us to our problem. Air conditioning is a great thing, except for the fact that it's also not a good thing, and you need it a lot in those circumstances. So,
absolutely,
I hope it heats up for you.
Thank you. So, Adam, I like to open the show by asking my guest the following question: if you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I think one of the things that I always like to think of, and there's always a question, of course, of how much this plays out in reality, is a willingness to try new things. I think that's sort of both can be a scary thing, but also an invigorating thing. I just to kind of lay out a few examples. When I went to college, I grew up in New York, and I went to California, went to Stanford for college. And I remember sort of first thinking that was exciting and interesting, and then being scared that I didn't know anybody and know anything about the West Coast. And then sort of the same thing when I switched careers from being a lawyer to working in this space, the energy climate space. It was, again, a bit of a challenge. But to me, that's always been the most rewarding part. So I try to keep it interesting. I try to keep it on my toes, much to the chagrin of some people who always try to pigeonhole you into some specialty. But I very much value those kind of opportunities. Oh, so and I would say my wife recently challenged me to take a tap dancing class to put myself on a limb, and I did. So you could pick between the two of them.
So that was going to be my next question, is that, staying on the theme of new things, what was the latest, newest thing you tried?
So that was it. My wife dared me to take a class. We had this is before COVID at this local area, and she said, name three. Before she dared me, she said, name three things you like. And I said, I've always liked that. I've been involved in. I was on the board of a theater company for a number of years, and she said, well, I dare you to do it. It was about me and about 10, I'll call them older ladies, in our class, and I think it's I'm certainly not going to become a professional tap dancer by any means. But like in other things in life, it opens up yourself. You open yourself up to what's possible and to what you can do if you stretch yourself a little bit. So it was good.
So before we get to the climate space, I want to double down on this piece for a second regarding the courage to try new things. You mentioned switching careers. You mentioned trying tap. Where did the courage come from?
Well, I think it's courage is a very kind word. I don't think of it that way. I actually think of it a little bit the other way, and this may not be I don't know if this rings true for other folks, But to me, I remember when I left my law firm, I was a partner at a firm here in New York, and I was there about 18 years. And I remember people asking me when I was thinking about moving on to try other things I thought might be more rewarding. People said, "Well, aren't you scared? Isn't it risky?" And I remember thinking to myself, "Yeah, absolutely," but I actually thought it was riskier to stay. And so I think that's how it comes up, which is to say, if you are in a situation, and there's no knock on some of my former partners who are terrific people doing terrific work, but for me, that was not something I found entirely satisfactory and entirely fulfilling. And it's always easy to kind of stay where you are. It's always easy to do what you know. But I think the way I like to think of that is that itself bears risk, includes risk. And the risk is that, you never get to experience anything else. And so I think you can call that courage, you can call that fear of inertia. But either way, that's sort of how I've always looked at it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And coming back to the climate space, can you give the audience an overview of Rewiring America and your role at the organization?
Sure. I'm our founding executive director. That means I run the organization's day-to-day activities in close partnership with its two co-founders, Saul Griffith, who's an engineer, a data scientist out of MIT, a MacArthur genius, as they say, who really did a lot of the groundbreaking analytical work about that has led to the formation of the organization and the traction we've been able to have so far. And our other co-founder, who's Alex Lasky, who was the founder and ran a company called O-Power for many years, which was really a pioneering company around thinking about energy efficiency and data around utility work. And so the three of us, in conjunction, kind of lead the organization. What Rewiring America is, it's a nonprofit organization, and the way I like to think of it is that we are a coalition of engineers, entrepreneurs, policymakers, volunteers, who are all committed to one basic mission, and that mission is to demonstrate through data and analysis and sort of practical pathways that we can both solve climate change, but also do so in a way that spurs our economy and makes for a brighter future. It is possible. It is possible with technology now. It is inspiring, and it's something we should want to do. And I think our mission at Rewiring America is to try to carry that message and to really show people how, at least as much as we can, partnering with others, how that's possible, and so we can move the needle. I mean, I'm reminded, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit further on. I was a policymaker until recently. I ran our climate and energy and finance portfolios, among other things, for New York State. And I always thought that one of the big challenges in moving, making change, making progress, sure, you have to have policy. Sure, you have to have resources. Sure, you have to have buy-in. Constituencies. But you also need buy-in. And that means psychological buy-in. People are always leery about change. And I think part of the work we can do in this organization and committed to doing is to try to hold people's hands a little bit and give them comfort that it's going to be okay and it's going to be better. And that's really where we focus.
So you mentioned it's possible. Can you give examples of some of the possibilities?
Sure. No, that's a great question. The basic thesis of possibility is electrification. So for those out there, and I know you have a fairly sophisticated audience, but maybe it's worth just a minute on what that means. When we say electrify everything, and that's one of our mottos, we mean take every machine that currently in our economy runs on fossil fuel, so cars that burn gasoline, boilers that run what we call natural gas, jet power plant that generate using whether it's coal or natural gas or even oil, and replace them with electric versions, electricity. And in the case of your house, for example, or your household, that means replacing your internal combustion engine vehicle with an EV. It means replacing your hot water heater or furnace with a heat pump. It means replacing your gas stove with an induction range. And more broadly in the economy, it means doing the same, as we move out of your house across the board. And it also means, very importantly, generating all the electricity that we're using in a clean way. So the reason that matters, and again, I'm sure this is familiar to some listeners, but probably worth just establishing, is we can generate electricity in a way that does not at the same time produce greenhouse gas emissions, right? Solar and wind being the most obvious, hydro even nuclear, and that's a subject of some controversy, but nuclear does not produce greenhouse gas emissions. These are all ways we can generate electricity. So if you electrify all the end uses of energy, cars, furnaces, whatnot, and you therefore generate that electricity through methods that themselves don't generate carbon or greenhouse gas emissions, you can decarbonize an economy. And that's possible today. We have all those technologies exist. There's no miracles needed, no breakthrough, science experiments where, some mad scientist in a lab kind of comes up with the next great technological innovation. All the capacity to do what I just described exists today. There are EVs, there are heat pumps, there's clean electricity generation. It's a question of scale, it's a question of political will, and it's a question of deployment and organization as of today.
Well, let me add one more question there, and let's stay with the home for a moment,
Sure.
or perhaps with the individual. The cost associated with converting to a heat pump, to purchase an electric car, there's a lot going on right now. I don't know if we're in the middle of COVID, the end of COVID. I don't know exactly where we are. I don't think anyone really does. Right, we're in COVID. Good point. We're in the amber, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Individuals bearing the cost of this conversion. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there, even people that are listening, that would love to perhaps buy an electric car or exchange their current HVAC for a heat pump. But how does Rewiring America propose or perhaps suggest that individuals can learn to, or perhaps bear the cost of doing this transition?
Sure. So that's obviously the key question once you get past the sort of premise that I articulated about the technological possibilities. And the good news, and I'll unpack this here in a minute, the good news is not only can we afford to do it, but it's actually economically beneficial. And I'll explain what I mean. It will be, by that, obviously, I mean, it would be better for households and better for the economy. Here's why. So I mentioned earlier Saul and his analytical work that led to the formation of Rewiring America. And so maybe it's worth spending a minute on what that is, because it really sets up the answer to your question. What Saul and his team did is funded by the Department of Energy and in consultation with some other folks, did a study of all of the energy flows in the economy, in the U.S. economy, where energy comes from, what it's used on, and where it ends up. And what we found, and this is something that's on our website, rewiringamerica.org, is we call our Sinkey Diagram. And Sinkey Diagram, for those of you who haven't seen it before, it kind of maps flows of things. And the Sinkey Diagram that Saul and his team put together led to a pretty remarkable conclusion, and that is this. Because if you electrified everything, they asked the question, so what if we electrify everything? If you electrified everything, the whole economy would need about half as much total energy as it currently consumes. Okay, so just take that for a minute as a given. And then you ask, well, why? Why is that so, right? So how can that be? Well, the main answer is that our current economy is pretty wasteful. Our current economy, run on fossil fuels, this is something I did not know until I sort of got involved in this work. 10% of our current economy, the energy in our current economy, is actually fossil fuels spent finding, refining, and transporting other fossil fuels, right? So exploring, digging it up, refining it, getting the gas to your car, all the rest of it. 10% of our energy is on that. So if you are electrifying, none of that is necessary. You don't need to dig oil out of the ground. You don't need to refine it. You don't need to transport it. You don't need to sell it. So that's right off the top. You have savings there. But the other big chunk, and there's more, and our analysis obviously goes through some granular detail, but the other big chunk, in fact, the even bigger chunk, is the heat loss. When you burn gas in your car, and I forget the exact percentage, but it's the vast majority of the energy created by the burning fuel actually goes out into the atmosphere as heat, as opposed to for propulsion in your car. And so if you electrify, and this is again the work that Saul and his team did, the whole economy as a whole would only require half as much energy. Okay, so how does that relate to the important question you asked about households being able to afford this? Well, that would flow down to households too, right? Ultimately, and we published an analysis last week showing that with supportive policies and sufficient financing, and I want to come back to that in a minute, the average household in America, if they fully electrified, could save anywhere between $1,000 to $2,500 a year on their energy bills. Households currently spend. up to $4,500 or so a year. So we're talking a significant household savings is available if we electrified everything. The challenge, which is the challenge that you identified in your question, is the upfront cost to get us to that, let's call it, better state. So that's where things like policy are going to be important, and that's in Rewiring America is where we really are focusing now, is moving away from sort of establishing the exciting premise that I just mentioned to you into the how policymakers get involved and help out, and also building a market, right? So when we have this is not a problem that hasn't been solved before. I don't know about you. When my wife and I bought our current house, we weren't able to come in and just say, "Oh, sure, how much is that house? Great, here's let me reach into my pocket. Here's the money." Right? What did we do? We said, "Well, we know we can afford that house over time, right? We know it's cheaper than our rental that we were living in. We know that so there's this magic technology called a mortgage, right? And what does a mortgage do? A mortgage lets you take advantage of the benefits of the future today, and the resources of the future today. Well, that's a key pillar if you think about it, of how we're going to do this too. So one of the things we're working on now is designing policies, and we'll be working with policymakers, and this is certainly where I'm focused personally, of course, on how do we make it cheaper for the average household to do this. The other, and that includes not just financing, where you could get mortgage type rates and either through a utility on bill financing or some other kind of lending, but also includes, frankly, helping manufacturers scale up so that costs come down. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are, but I certainly have always been stunned every time I look at the charts around PV solar prices and battery storage prices over time. They just keep falling and keep falling and keep falling and keep falling. And that's part because of adoption and scale. And so we'll see the same thing, I think, on some of the things we're talking about here. And so all those things together are really where policy and can help shape market and drive markets to get down prices. The other side of the equation, and I don't want to, happy to talk about any of this in more detail, but just to finish out the answer to your question, is going to be making sure that the market is ready for this. Because one of the challenges, I put solar on my roof, and this is at a time when I was overseeing our state's energy portfolio, and I still had a hard time. And I like to think, without being too self-important, that they were probably putting me as a priority customer, given that I was in charge of the energy, the energy portfolio for the governor and the state they're operating. And it was still difficult because there's permitting, there's regulations, there's inspections, there's lags of time. So we need to clean that stuff up too. We need to get to a point where it's easy, if you're a homeowner, for you to say, I want to do this. Here's cheap financing, and here's a guided, streamlined process to make this happen. So that's where we're working now on identifying and providing roadmaps and assistance as to how we get from here to there. Because but the key takeaway is there is a there in the future that is better economically for you at the household level, better for us at the economy level, and obviously better at an environmental climate level. And that doesn't even account, and I'm sure we'll come on to this, all the benefits economically of that work that's going to be required to get us from here to there.
So I understand the financing model, familiar with solar financing and other financing. You mentioned mortgages, et cetera. Where are we from a policy standpoint?
So there are models, right? And if you're asking about in terms of policy support for those kind of that kind of financing, there is work happening, right? So when you think about, and I should say we are, I think, recording this 7 days before the 2020 election. So whatever I'm saying now will clearly be relatively moot one way or the other in a couple of weeks, right? Either if Biden wins, I think it's fair to say that opens up, based upon what he's proposed as plans, a significant number of opportunities at the federal level. If Trump should get reelected, obviously then that changes that dynamic based upon the positions that they have taken on this issue. But at the state level, and I think it's important to plug the state level here a little bit, just not only because it's where I've worked in the past, but also because of its importance to these issues. When we're talking about homeowners, when we're talking about folks on the ground, obviously they are much more in touch regularly with their state and local governments. There is work going on, and so I'll give you an example. Here in New York State, NYSERDA, which is the Energy Research and Development Authority here, has a pilot program out now, just on the topic I was talking about before, where you as a lenders can sign up for credit enhancement. That is to say, guarantees against losses if they're making loans for qualified projects along the electrification energy efficiency lines. to homeowners, and they can get backstopped by a state entity up to certain percentages if they make those loans, and that encourages lending, right? Because I'm a lender. If I know that I'm going to be covered for losses up to X percent on the first dollar by a creditworthy counterparty like NYSERDA or New York State, that encourages me to lend, and encourages me to lend and compete at lower interest rates than others. So I think those are the kind of models that we're seeing. I mean, obviously there'll be a role at the federal government if it comes to it for expanding and turbocharging that. We certainly are working on proposals along that line here at Rewiring America. But I think there are models for that. There's other things going on too. You mentioned solar financing, right? And so there's been a tremendous market in the solar tax credits and tax equity and all of that. So I mean, there's definitely the models that we can use here to help on the financing side. But the bottom line is we could use a whole heck of a lot more. I mean, I think we envision a very robust growth to that market over the coming years.
I do too. Going back to the Sankey diagram for a moment, not only is it a beautiful piece of work, and I'm actually thinking about how I can get a print of that for my wall. It's just gorgeous to look at.
Well, hold, because we are actually talking about, I mean, it's an iHeart thing, but we are actually talking about how we can produce, using that as a way to produce some branding stuff. So if you want, swag is coming. I think what we recently had a proposal from someone to take that and put it on all sorts of items, because
I'm looking for about a 4 foot by 3 foot for right behind me when I sit here and
not
do
a
interviews.
t-shirt, not a t-shirt,
not a t-shirt. I'm looking for something at scale, so when my kids walk by, they can take a look at it too. Because the point I want to get to here is that
please.
I watched a video with Saul, and something he said during that video really stuck out to me. He pointed to a section in the Sankey chart, and it was a very quick video, and I'm happy to put a link to it in the show notes. But he said every one of these, and I'm going to use the word industries, that has a 0.1 next to it is a $25 billion opportunity. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So point one, the reference on point one is that's the level of granularity that our Sankey chart. And again, I think I would encourage you to link to it, because obviously we're talking here in the abstract, and you and I both know it. But I think listeners obviously will want to take a look here. But that's the level of granularity, 0.1%. Of the energy flows in the economy that are mapped in the Sankey diagram. So that's what that means. But what I think Saul's talking about there, and I have to go back and look at the video, but based upon our conversations, is that the transformation of these industries from their fossil fuel history, and our economy as a whole from its fossil fuel history, to our electric future, right, is an enormous economic opportunity. And so I'll give you a couple examples, and maybe this is exactly what we're talking about here. But we just finished talking about financing, right? I anticipate, and you said you agree, I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars in lending over the coming years to homeowners looking to upgrade and put solar panels on their roof, put electric cars in their garages, upgrade their hot water heaters, right? So we've done an analysis that says that, think for a minute about who's going to do all that work, right? Folks, doing the work on the ground in terms of folks at your home, but then who's going to help underwrite those loans, manage that financing, and deal with it? Those are people, those are jobs here in the United States, right? You can't really outsource or retrofit. And along with it, in each of those industries and touch points over on the way. So the banker and the financing who provides the capital, who then works with the contractor who brings people along, who then buys the stuff from the manufacturing entity, who then, of course, has to have the installation, and then the service, and then the people who are obviously providing ancillary services to those industries as they grow up. All of that together, we did an estimate. It's going to create 25 million jobs over the next 15 years. We published this on our website. And those jobs are good paying jobs. And if you think about the math for a second, 25 million jobs, at what, $75,000 a job, I'm doing quick math in my head, is what? Well, I can't do the math in my head right now. I'm apparently not in school anymore. But it's significant. That's the gross economic opportunity of the economy right now, which is, we're looking at 25 million jobs over the next 15 years, good paying jobs. And we have a paper, as I say, that I would certainly refer people. Maybe you could link to it. It's called our jobs report. But what you're talking about is, what does that transition look like? And it looks like unbelievable economic opportunity up and down industries, whether it's in manufacturing of cars, whether it's in installing solar in your roof, whether it's financing those things, whether it's financing the manufacturing of cars, whether it's the ancillary services around servicing those things. Any of those things. And the Sinkey diagram you're referring to obviously breaks it down by industry, but that's what we're talking about.
It's interesting you say that, because just yesterday I had a conversation with a young man who is doing essentially lead generation for contractors and construction here in Dallas. And one of the things I recommended to him was regarding energy efficiency and retrofitting buildings, and how perhaps, contractors can start differentiating themselves from the current market by offering these services, which are going to become more important over time. So if I'm hearing you correctly, that would come under, let's say, HVAC, for example. Sure. In that diagram, that in itself, that industry, that one niche itself could be, that $25 billion opportunity.
Yeah, and I think, again, I have to go back and look at the math though, but you're talking about almost $2 trillion in activity if you just sort of think of the 25 million jobs at 75,000 jobs on average, some of them higher, some of them lower. But you're talking about a tremendous amount of economic activity to make this transition happen. And when you think about that, and you think about that in the various industries, to your point, the opportunity, it's not exactly spread out linearly, but the opportunity in each of these industries is tremendous. Because if you think about, the total amount of this transition, there is going to be significant opportunities in HVAC work. There's going to be significant opportunities in electrical work to install load center upgrades at homes. There's going to be tremendous opportunity in finance for folks who are going to be making the lend and processing the loans. There's going to be tremendous opportunities in ancillary businesses that support those activities. And each of those things is an area where, I think people are going to see that these are the jobs of the future. I'll just tell you one story that I don't know if it sort of rings true here, but it strikes me as one I really remember from my time in government. The governor used to ask me, how many people are in clean energy and work in clean energy in New York State? And the number we had was about 150,000 at the time. And I would ask him, I'd say, but Governor, how many of those people do you think know they're working in green and clean energy? And I said, probably 10 to 15,000, right? Most of those people just think they're going to work. They think they're going to help fix a house. They think they're going to install solar panels. They think they're going to put in insulation. They think they're going to put it in a solar farm. They think they're doing a connection, a wiring connection, interconnection to the grid. They think they're financing these things. They think they're working on tax equity deals, and that's all true. But all that rolled up is the clean economy, and I think that's what we're going to see at a large scale. And that's what I think what you're talking about in terms of the opportunities are all those things that flow through all those different categories.
That's a great point, Adam. So, Adam, I'm going to make a hard right turn here and get to the crux of our conversation.
Okay.
It's the why behind what you do. 18 years in law practice, teaching law. Now you're here at Rewiring America. Why and what keeps you motivated?
Well, I think there's a stage in between that, and we talked about it a little earlier, which is, I have 3 young children, right? And I had a career where things were going very well, and you do work, and you kind of just pick your head up and put your head down and go day to day. But at some point, I think, and particularly climate is a one of these examples. I think it certainly came to me, and I hope it comes to others. You say, well, what do I want to be doing with my life? What is the way I could be of greatest use and most contribution? Whatever that is, and it could be, it doesn't have to be the single-handedly doing X, Y, or Z. It's just, where's your best contribution? And that question to me has always been, sometimes it's an annoying question. I sometimes envy folks who don't really, kind of just have either by choice or, at some level, I don't envy the folks who have it by no choice, but don't have to sort of think about that or don't think about that. But for me, I was in a fortunate position where I could have some reflection and decided that I really wanted to make sure that I spent my time on something I thought really mattered and could help other folks. And this just sort of came to it. I would add also, I don't know, if others have had this experience. I came to energy and the ins and outs of climate policy relatively late in my career. And so it had for me and still has for me the excitement of the new. This is just an unbelievably fascinating field where things are transforming, in real time. I like to say that I think in sort of like the life before the internet, my kids always ask me, how is it possible to live without, iPads and Wi-Fi and all the things they do? And I think in 20 or 30 years, are going to ask similar questions about how is it possible to live with all those fossil fuels in your house and in your, in your atmosphere. I think we're going to see an unbelievable transition. So to me, it's exciting to be part of that, and just, do what you can to help out and to grow and learn, and all those things. I think those are all real true for me.
How old are your children?
So I have 11, 8, and 6. Those are their actual biological ages. If you want their psychological and and emotional development, they vary. But 2 boys, and then my youngest is a girl.
Well, we're in the same boat. I have 3 daughters. They're 8, 10, and 12.
Oh man, my daughter is the youngest, but she is definitely brings the most energy and sort of complexity sometimes to our lives. I love her dearly, but I don't, at some level, I think, you're a man, you're a good man because you're about to enter those teenage years that everybody warns you about.
One day at a time.
Yes, there you go.
One day at a time. And when your kids go back to listening to this in the future, they'll be proud of what you said.
Well, for now, we're just trying to get through. I mean, this is obviously, as I'm sure you've experienced, and anyone with kids has experienced, quite an interesting time to be a parent of kids in that age group that we're talking about, not just because of the Zoom school and all of that, but also having to have the conversations with them about, life is not a certainty, and you need to, being resilient, having resilience around that, and empathy around some of these people going through harder times, and all that is something my wife and I very much try to use this opportunity to impart to them in their lives.
Absolutely. So you said 18 years with a law firm, then working in government, and now with Rewiring America.
Yep.
What are some of the most valuable lessons that you would say you've learned about yourself?
Well, about myself, is I think, I think one of the lessons is, and it's sort of almost paradoxical, the answer is that never think what the answer is, right? So the answer to your question is sort of is almost a processed answer, which is to say that one of the things I've learned is that it's always a process of evolving and learning and trying to learn more and reflect and develop. And there's a mountain, it's a mountain without a top, right? In the sense of, as one thinks about your own learning about yourself. And so that's the closest thing I've had to a fundamental lesson. But in terms of more day-to-day stuff, I think I've always done well responding to sort of challenges. There are folks out there, and Saul is a terrific example of it, who are just throwing off sparks like sparks from a generator, always throwing off new ideas and new things and new directions. And it's exciting and exhilarating to work with someone like that. For me, whether it was at my law firm or in government, I've always been, I think, more effective when I sort of react to that and think about how to make those things operational, how to think about presenting them, how to think about them in a strategic, tactical way, and work towards making things happen in a practical expression. And so I think, one of the things we all try to do in life is realize, what you can bring to a table, but also realize how important it is to have other people there bringing other things as well. So I've always tried to take that lesson to heart when I can.
So speaking of strategic, it's 2025. Ideal scenario. What does Rewiring America look like?
So that's, you almost can look through my computer, I imagine, at this moment and see the projected steady state budget projections that my team has been sending to me about what it looks like over the next 3 to 5 years. What we have in mind for a vision in there is, I would say, a couple of things, right? One is that the narrative that we've been talking about during this session is become the narrative. I mean, just to say it out loud, we're a week out from what was the final debate between President Trump and Vice President Biden, and the question came up, as it always seems to come up these days, around clean energy jobs, and Vice President Biden was obviously very committed to it, and he's made that point. But even the way it was framed by the moderator was, how can you say they're consistent with the economy? It's a sort of very defensive. And it feels almost as if the conversation for too long around this topic has been in an eat your vegetables kind of way, right? Like, oh man, I know long term it's going to be good, but boy, I just don't want any more broccoli. And I think our mission at Rewiring America, and if you ask me about 2025, what I'd like to see first and foremost is that we've played a part in changing that narrative. And so now people are not asking, why are you tackling climate change, or how can you do so, but why aren't you? Oh my goodness. what an opportunity missed. This is an opportunity for our economy. It's an opportunity for our children. It's an opportunity for our environment. And we want people to get, damn excited about it. We think the future can be awesome. We think it can be economically beneficial and a brighter future if we do this in a committed way. And so to me, that's number one. In terms of the organization itself, we really have, I would say, fairly ambitious plans to help shape a policy agenda at the federal level that facilitates the work we're talking about, but also that at state and local level, we would love to see, rewiring Missouri, rewiring Colorado, rewiring New Jersey, rewiring England, rewiring Canada. And the reason is not so much that we want to see our brand, in lights. It's because that narrative and that approach both is, we think, going to help us get as a society around the corner, but also reflects where we think the work needs to be done. It needs to be done at the local level. It needs to be done by people who want to go to their town halls and say, no, this is important for us here. We need to have our building code streamlined in a way that allow us to do this in our houses. We want to build the narrative and build the movement, much like you've seen in other sort of social changes. It used to be that everywhere you went, there was smoke inside of restaurants, right? And now it almost seems as odd that there is when you are at a place that has that, if at all. And the reason is because everywhere it kind of just became the way the ethos changed, and certainly on climate, and particularly the optimistic vision of, people demanding and wanting to see it, not for necessarily moral reasons, but also for economic reasons. That would be, if we could play a role in that and help that happen, I think that would be a great success.
It's a beautiful vision. If there is someone that's listening right now that wants to get involved with the organization, has the dream of rewiring America, rewiring Texas, Missouri, like you mentioned, what's the best way for them to reach out and get in touch with you?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you for asking. I mean, we are, one of the things that's been striking to me since our launch this summer has been how many people have sort of come out, raised their hands and said, hey, how can we help? We've had, people go to our site and make donations. We've also had a tremendous amount of volunteer interest. People sort of said, hey, I've got this skill. I can write. I have some local policy expertise. I've come from finance, whatever it is. And they've signed up. So on our website, there's a place where volunteers can come along and sign up. We greatly encourage that. We have someone on our staff who actually is responsible for talking to people who want to volunteer, understanding where they might fit in, and helping and make the use of their skills and talents and interest. So I would encourage you to do that. I'd encourage you, if you want to, we're a C3, we're a nonprofit, so any donations are greatly appreciated. And we're also hiring. I mean, we are always looking to build out some capacity if the fit is right as we grow. So any of those three would be great. We also welcome, we're pretty open source. We put on, for example, we put this whole report out last week. And we've also made available just not the report, but also plan on making some of the underlying modeling assumptions available too. And so we welcome people to engage with us. We want to get this right. We want this narrative to be one that is not necessarily rewiring America's narrative, but then a narrative that everybody can feel confident about, believe in, stand on firmly, and launch out into, as I say, a brighter future. So come volunteer. Lots of work to be done. Lots of opportunities for you. Come support us. Otherwise, rewiringamerica.org is our website, and we obviously very much welcome any interest to that effect.
And I will put links to your website in the show notes. And I highly recommend people read your reports. They're phenomenal reports. They're not too jargony. They're very easy to digest. So strongly recommend that. Adam, last question. If you could share some advice or words of wisdom with the audience, and it could be personal or professional, what would it be? But before I go on, you mentioned earlier and I said courage, that you're not afraid to try new things. Specific advice, professional or personal, for the audience, what would it be?
So I think professionally, I would just say, always ask yourself why you're doing something, right? So I think that there's this great tendency, and it, I think it's, whether it's corporate culture, I saw this both in corporate culture and in government as well. People, afraid to screw up. Right, afraid to do something so they don't look bad and whatnot. But I think if one of the things that I've always tried to do is ask, well, hold on, what are we trying to accomplish here? We're not showing up at an office just to show up at an office. We're trying to accomplish something, whether it's get policy enacted, in the case of my law firm, represent a client. In the case of our work at Rewiring America now, develop and promulgate the narrative and the pathway that I've talked about. And always kind of ask yourself, is what I'm doing helping us advance that? Right? How can I help advance? How can I best help keep that goal in mind? And I think that through line really helps, has always helped anchor me as a way to kind of think about my work as where I should prioritize, what I should be spending my energies on. And sometimes you're wrong. I mean, that's just life. But being wrong is actually can be a refreshing experience if people recognize that you're trying to get it right while you do it. I think that the challenge I've always found when young folks have always worked for me is I think they've always kind of, or too often feel as if it's the continuation of school where there's a right answer and their job is to get it, as opposed to their job is to help advance the mission of what we're all trying to work on. So I think that just keeping that in mind and recognizing that you may make some mistakes along the way, but that you'll get a lot further and a lot more traction and respect if you do them in the service of trying to advance the broader goal of either the organization or the work you're doing.
Adam, I love the idea of advancing the mission. I look forward to watching Rewiring America advance and catching up with you again soon.
Well, thank you very much for your time and your interest, and obviously for doing all the great work you do. I think I was mentioning before, we're a big fan of your podcast and the folks you have on. So really honored to be here, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Adam, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care.
Before we go, I'm excited to share that we've launched our comic strip, The Adventures of Mira and Nexy. You can find the first issue at our website, nexuspmg.com, under the Original Content tab. Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend or reach out to us on social media, where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.